Welcome back to the Bentonville Beacon podcast, where we're sharing stories and advice from the leaders and businesses sparking the rise of Bentonville, one of the fastest growing and most dynamic cities in the United States, nestled in the Ozark Mountains of northwest Arkansas in America's heartland. Hey, I'm your host, James Bell, and I am thrilled to virtually share the studio today with Meagan Kinmonth Bowman, who is CEO and founder of STOPWATCH. In addition to leading STOPWATCH, Meagan is a member of both Fast Company's executive board and the Forbes Technology Council. Meagan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, James. I'm excited to be here.
Let's get started with one of my favorite questions, which is tell us your story. Lean in anywhere you want, but do tell us how you ended up in Bentonville, how you developed your expertise in CPG and supply chain, and what was the motivating force that moved you from working for somebody else to being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, happy to share. It's kind of a fun story, actually. Thanks for asking, James. So about 9 years ago, it was announced that Walmart was going to buy Jet. That was a big announcement. And I happened to be particularly interested because I had been a code monkey smashing Mark Loray's Quidsy code into Amazon many, many years earlier. Very low level, nobody special, but definitely part of that kind of magic transition for soap.com, diapers.com, et cetera. And one thing I noticed about the code that Loray, and his team were writing is that it was taking into consideration things like distance, volume, liquid weight. It was revolutionary at the time because Amazon, was still kind of looking at books and DVDs. And I remember coming home to my husband in Seattle and saying, hey, I've got this elegant, gorgeous code, a little far-fetched, but, you can make money shipping diapers and marshmallows and basketball hoops, like with this algorithm. We didn't think anything of it. And then a family member of mine said, hey, this thing's probably going to happen. And my husband looked at me and he goes, we got to move to Bentonville. And so we moved here, 9 years ago, sight unseen, with the intention of building STOPWATCH. So definitely a culture shock. I love it here. I'll tell you that the funniest thing was when my son first went to elementary school, he was shocked. They split up the dodgeball teams by vendors and Walmart. And he came home and said, Mom, are we a vendor or are we Walmart? And I said, well, neither. I guess I'm unemployed and your dad's a professor. So just pick the team that looks the best. So that's really kind of how we crashed here in Bentonville. I'll tell you that, we couldn't start a company right off the bat. There was a lot of work to do. And the premise of STOPWATCH is fairly complicated insofar as we believe that SAP and Oracle have really been asleep at the wheel for the last probably 15, 20 years. And the biggest piece that they have been really ignoring, and I don't blame them for ignoring it because it's hard and kind of crazy and expensive, is receiving mixed data signals from kind of everywhere out there and then normalizing it back into the system. When Amazon was the only game in town for CPG and or a lot of the volume was going through brick and mortar retail, those economics weren't super important because, we figured out really well as an industry how to ship large pallets of things to centralized locations. But the bet my husband and I took was that more and more people were going to be shopping online and that they were going to be buying cheaper stuff like chips, trash bags, and toothpaste, and that there's nothing more exciting than watching an angry nerd seek revenge on his old company. So that's why we're here.
Well, that's great. Well, before we dive in further, would it be helpful to talk about supply chain and what's happened in the last couple of years? I guess it's a vast understatement to say that supply chain has had some problems that we were able to notice the last couple of years. And I don't think most people realize just how complicated supply chain was. I mean, gosh, when I just think about it a little bit, I'm surprised that an apple reaches my hands for really pennies. I don't think most consumers have understood how many sort of choke points and places for failure there were in the supply chain, and we're still having a hangover for them, of course. In fact, for example, with chips, And when I say chips, I do mean both electronic chips and Frito-Lays. If you've seen the news, I probably
Absolutely.
just shelf life this episode mentioning the Frito-Lays crisis. But why did this really happen in the first place? And what's wrong with the supply chain that we're having a hangover today?
I think there are probably people that are a lot more in tuned with the mechanics of supply chain than I am. But I'm very good at systems and understanding relationships between things like time, space, mathematical kind of velocity, a little bit more on the aerodynamics kind of, or thermodynamics kind of scale. And, you know, the thing I can liken it best to is, you know, if you're on a sailboat and you're, you know, 1 degree off and, you know, all of a sudden you end up totally on the other side of the world. That is incredibly simple, but what I see has happened is, you know, there have been great systems over time, and you know, as things have fluxed, whether it's in the cost of goods or the sourcing mechanisms, or you know, 4 decimal points, or the yen, or I mean, like systems are constantly changing, and as those inputs are changing, you've got a group of executives, and this is, you know, we did the same thing at Hallmark, sitting around and saying, okay, that's a small thing. Are we going to totally like stop everything and adjust for it while it's small? And I mean, like, we're all P&L, you know, experts. Like, it, a lot of times it doesn't make sense. We hear the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And so really, you know, COVID was essentially a mountain of a lot of little 1 degree issues, all the way from, you know, how things scan at shelf to, you know, how we count things, you know, if you're thinking about at the retail level, to how many people we let in the store, all the way back to, you know, what's the you know, the tree that has to be shaved down to make that particular piece of, you know, cottonelle paper. It's just, it's fascinating to me, and I know that it was hurtful to a lot of people, but it was probably, as a data scientist, one of the most interesting times, because it really was just a death of 1,000 cuts on a mass system scale. So yeah, interesting and tragic at the same time.
Sure. And imagine we had I wouldn't call it new, but as with all things COVID, nothing was really new. It was just vastly magnified. I imagine changing consumer behaviors had something to do with it too, behaviors and expectations. How did those affect or make these problems worse?
Gosh, it's hard to separate me as a mom versus me as a business owner. I'll tell you from a business perspective, you know, we'd been working on STOPWATCH, on the infrastructure and the technology, for about 3.5 years. So we'd been testing it, we'd been building it. I'd, you know, been part of the Harvest group, and then started One Stone Solutions group to continue to test and build. And, you know, we were to the point where, you know, just before COVID, we were going to all these really, you know, high level CTOs and saying, hey, you know what, have we got a deal for you? You know, only 2% of your total product, you know, fits into this weird bucket right now. But, you know, that's going to be a real problem. We had all these beautiful projections of how in 2030 everybody was going to be bankrupt, except like, you know, Allbirds or something. And, you know, so it was really kind of this call to action. And we had so many great meetings and were treated so well. And what every single senior leader told us was, what you're describing is extremely important. We see it. It is not urgent. Only 2% of my total product in my billion-dollar industry is moving through this kind of awkward channel, as you call it, and we are aware that it's unprofitable, and we're aware that we have no visibility there. However, I can get one more facing, you know, in 10 more stores that, you know, or, you know, 10 more mods in Walmart, and all of a sudden, you know, my shareholders are happy. So it was really kind of a weird time pre-COVID for us, because we had this kind of Cadillac or Ferrari of a software that this is not how you should ever build software. We didn't do product market fit. We literally just built what we knew needed to be built, and, you know, funded it ourselves and just knew that it was it. Well, you know, just before COVID, we're getting all these no's, and literally, you know, $6 million, and, you know, a bunch of like developers, we've been together for a long time, we're kind of all looking at each other, and it was crazy. about 2 days into COVID, I got a call from General Mills, and the head guy there said, "I just dug your card out of the trash can. I'm overnighting, couriering, handing you a check for $500,000. Spin up a server. Let's go."
Wow.
And that's literally how we took off. So the consumer behavior, went from 2% of transactions for a company like Mills up to 60% overnight. Now, people keep telling me like, "Wow, you really saw this coming," and that is. We did not see anything coming. We were almost like, completely bankrupt and dead on the side of the road. Definitely overbuilt for what was nowhere close to coming. And then when COVID really, pushed off, because we had built it so wide, deep, and a little bit crazy, we were onboarding, Fortune 1 and Fortune 500 companies in 10 days, and they couldn't believe it. And so it was really a right place, right time for us, in terms of building really ridiculous technology that nobody really wants until they want it.
Well, you were prepared to be lucky, but there is something to be said for startup luck. A lot of companies have made it that way.
So lucky.
I think any founder who doesn't admit that luck has something to do with it is off base.
Yeah, I would even argue, now that I read all these startup books and how you're supposed to go to market, I'm like, holy cow, we totally did it wrong. We did it completely wrong. Nobody should have given us money.
Congratulations.
Who built a giant product that nobody uses?
That is definitely, that is definitely backwards.
Yeah, I know that now.
Yeah. Well, how do you stand up in front of, folks who are getting ready to start a company and tell them that?
Yeah, well, I do have to say, my first job out of college, I was, a hire number 2 or 3. For a very, very impressive woman who still is probably one of the Midwest's, leading female founders. And for me, working for somebody like that, I watched her build companies, and I watched some of them fall. I watched some of them go through the roof, everything. And I just kept saying, man, that's the type of work I want to do, because that work, you have to be a little bit crazy, but that work, shot at making a really big difference. You also have a shot at being completely broke and, awful, but I didn't see that. I saw a lot of, positive wins, and I've been part of a couple failing startups. I've had a couple good ones, and I think you just keep playing the game.
That's right. Well, that's great. Well, let's talk about Stopwatch. We haven't really dove into what is it you actually do, and how are you making today's supply chain better? How are you helping your customers?
Yeah, so the way I like to describe Stopwatch is an ERP wrapper. So most companies have a really big enterprise resource planning system that they bought, 10, 15 years ago. It's usually, Oracle, NetSuite, SAP, some Microsoft Dynamics. Within the last maybe 5 years, they've gotten hip to the cloud, and so these kind of really big systems that have really not changed a whole lot in terms of their neural dynamic connection with all of the other outside feeds. So, when you log into Microsoft and go to your Outlook, let's say, that was never designed to interact with, the full company product, right? I'm cool with that. The interesting thing is, as social and shopping and everything started to change, those signals couldn't get back fast enough. So, there were a bunch of little tools out there. You can, scrape your ratings, you can get your reviews, you can, a lot of little siloed things. But at the end of the day, if they weren't coming back on and perching on something that actually was connected to cost of goods and inventory and if we add this keyword and we sell more, do we need more raw materials? Yes. Do we need to understand the lead time? Yes. Just basic connection points like that. And so really what Stopwatch does is wrap around the enterprise resource planning, suck everything out. It sits in that middle layer, and then pretty much everything on top of it, whether it's the retailer data, whether it's syndicated data, whether it's social, whether it's political, whatever it is, it goes into Stopwatch and is normalized around one single product. So, what I get really excited about telling the story is, back in the 80s, when Procter & Gamble used to come up with a great new product idea, they would give it a symbol or a number, right? Like this is product, you know, spring 1, 2, 3, 4. And all their guys would go out on the road and sell spring 1, 2, 3, 4. But Target would want it to be, you know, spring 3, 2, 1. And Walmart would want it to be, you know, 1, 2 spring. And basically, like, when things actually went into production, one SKU that came out of product development really went into production is, you know, an average of 15 when you look at kind of all the different ways. And so GS1, the one company who's supposed to keep all this together, has not done that. So, you know, when you've got a barcode on the back of a product, you know, a different barcode could be on the back of the same product in a different retailer. And it's really kind of that reverse engineering. And so what Stopwatch does is, I like to say, we put the genie back in the bottle and say, okay, you know, if you had one SKU, how would you build this out differently, you know, as a brand new company? And that's what Stopwatch is really fun. We work with the Fortune 500 companies, and we're just digging through a lot of stuff and basically reversing things down. But we've also really taken off with the pre-revenue companies. So we've gotten really hot in the venture capital market, where people are saying, hey, you know, I'm going to invest in this consumer brand, and like between Shopify, Salesforce, and Stopwatch, we don't ever need to buy an ERP. We literally have the entire system put together and can scale up and down without a huge cost. And so these kind of data practices are kind of popping up overnight. So we just love playing in both spaces for very different reasons. The pre-revenue, because we get to architect kind of how it should be from the ground up. And the big companies, because we get to like dig in and find all these really interesting stories about how things changed, and when something became a BOGO, and then how it got a weird wrapper and that changed the number, and you know, all that sort of stuff actually really matters when you're talking about, you know, raw cost of goods and how things are built up to a finished good and then commercialized.
Yeah, you bet. You know, you mentioned venture capital a moment ago. You know, a company such as Stopwatch probably struggles if it can't get off the ground with venture capital as an accelerant. So can we talk about fundraising for a moment? And I'm thinking about, you've had a couple of pretty substantial raises, but that makes you one of the part of a tiny
really
percentage of women who have successfully raised venture capital. Will you talk about your experience fundraising, and how in the world did you buck the trend?
Yeah, I will. I'll say, you know, first of all, I want to say there are so many different ways to start a company. And so, you know, venture is a great fit for me, my personality. What I like about ventures, I feel like it, you know, I'm an athlete at heart. I feel like it pulls me through the process, and you either win or lose. And I enjoy that. It's very stressful for a lot of people. And, you know, the idea of not actually making money is also very stressful for a lot of people. For me, I really love the process of venture capital, for all the reasons a lot of people hate it. That being said, I turned down a lot of money. And so I would argue that a lot of women, and I've talked with a lot of female founders, you know, the first check-in is often fairly desperate, because they get 800 no's, and then somebody's going to write, you know, a very small check for 30% of the company, and they look like a savior. And all of a sudden they start the cap table in a really tough position. I'm not judging. Like, I've been there. I've made some really stupid decisions early on, but the problem with a cap table is, you know, it just gets worse, if that makes sense. And so I don't know that females, I know I didn't. I know I had to have a lot of people around me saying, don't take that money. I know that you have to, you know, either let somebody go or, you know, sell a car or whatever, but do not take that money. You're going to hate yourself in 5 years. And so I've been real blessed to have people around me to say no. So I've actually turned down more capital than I've taken on.
Great.
That being said, you know, I would say, I think in Q3, I think Crunchbase just reported that like venture capital to females is down to the 1.3%. And I think we were at an all-time high last year of 2.2%.
Yeah.
And that's just inexcusable. And I mean, my brothers and sisters of color and LGBTQ, and you know, the interesting thing is, the more kind of funds that I invest in personally that are focused on diversity are out returning the traditional funds 10-1. Now the base is smaller, so let's make sure we're doing the math right. I mean, Bessemer and SoftBank are always going to look like the big guys because they're playing off of a big base. But when I take, apples to apples funds, $20 million funds or $100 million funds, or, kind of these localized funds, and say, okay, I literally can go down the website and say, okay, do they have a diversity of mix of founders? And I can pretty much put them up against different funds, and they're outperforming, about 4-1 in my humble estimation. And so for me, I'm all about women's rights, but I also really like to win. And if there's a winning combination of, different ways people think, to me, that's actually mitigating risk, not bringing risk on. And I think I've had a lot of conversations, especially really early in my capital raising days, where, I came into the room and I looked like a risk. I can remember days that I have a neighbor who's a leadership coach at Walmart, and I rented him to come with me to Kansas City. Wow. to sit at the table with me because I would get the meetings and I would get the attention. And when they'd ask him what he did, he had some really light answer, and we could tell how that worked. And I mean, I've got stories upon stories where just unconscious bias, and I think I've actually had a lot of unconscious bias in the system too. So I don't even want to say I've been innocent, but it is a little bit crazy if you get around a bunch of, even men, I mean, just telling stories about, hilarious venture capital, oofs. We've all got a lot of them, and they're oofy. They are oofy.
Yeah, you bet. It is a wonder. We say that venture capitalists are greedy, but I wonder, how greedy are they really? Because it's a wonder that
gamblers.
It's a wonder though that they haven't picked up on the data that shows that. We'll just call it, we'll start with women, but you could just say non-white male founders build more profitable companies and more sustainable companies.
Yeah, I mean, so this is probably going to be too much, but I always tell, so there is a gentleman who runs a very successful business here in Northwest Arkansas who would die if I said his name, but he reached out to me. He was supposed to meet more friends. That was his mandate from his executive coach. And he said, she looks friendly. Reached out to me on LinkedIn. We went and had coffee. And he's telling me about his business model. It's completely different than mine.
Sure.
It's evergreen. It's, very long-standing, a beautiful model. And he said, so tell me about your business. I said, well, I'm exactly the opposite. I'm building something really big, and I don't want to exit for millions. I want to exit for billions, or I don't want to exit at all. I either want to blow up or I want to be billions. And he was like, that's interesting. And I said, hey, come back to my house. There were 15 developers working in my house at the time. And we were broke as hell. We were so broke. I brought him in, and I told the guys, I said, guys, I'm going to pitch him. I'm going to pitch him to invest in us, to make our payroll this Friday. And they kind of all looked at me, and we sat down at the kitchen table, and I brought out a whiteboard, and he's very mathematical. He's a Berkeley, scientist. And so I basically drew out the algorithmic mapping, and he goes, yeah, I can get behind this. And I said, okay, so we're playing Moneyball here. And he goes, I could go to Vegas right now and put it all on reds and be in a better spot. And what I said was, well, I wouldn't bet against me any day. So if that's your move, that's fine, but I'll see you in Vegas and I will shred you. And that's how I got my first check. So, I mean, you have to really be out there. I was at my kitchen table.
We dropped an episode with Phil Libin this week, and one of the things he said, one of the things he said that you have to do is be memorable if you're raising money.
Yeah.
I would call that memorable. What advice would you give to other women raising funding?
Call me. I think
Excellent.
The biggest thing is so I've got this little text chain of some women that, are in Forbes, all the way down to women who have failed 15 times.
Cool.
And basically it's our wall of shame. And any woman can write something in and just say, this happened today. And everybody's just get up, bad. Let's go. You can do it. And it sounds really cheesy, but I think the big thing for me and what my team at STOPWATCH does a really good job of is they know that raising funds is really lonely. It's not something the whole company can do. And it would be stupid to have, that much energy put toward, one single activity. And so, I'm actually raising Series A. We're rounding the corner right now. And, for the last 5 weeks, I've been in quarantine from the team. So we've got a team of 20, my favorite people on the planet, and my chief operating officer doesn't let me come to anything. Because that's how much focus it takes. I mean, you have to get a lot of no's. It has to be a lot of volume, and it's just a lot of work on just one thing. And I sometimes I'll send him a note and I'll say, I'm just kind of lonely. Can you send me some fuel? And the team has this little chat, and they just start dropping in good things that have happened. Hey, we closed this customer. Oh my gosh, this customer that was really unsatisfied now loves us. They brought a friend. I mean, just little things like that, and it just kind of breathes life back into you to that horrible no that you had just received about like how not only is your idea dumb, but like, you are like, you shouldn't even be walking on the planet. I mean, that's how you kind of walk out feeling. Yeah. And then you come back to your team and you're like, wait, no, we are doing something. Like, I'm going to hear what I needed to hear, because I really don't think anybody gives malicious advice. I think there's always something to be heard. I think whether or not I can hear it at the time is right or wrong. But that's the biggest thing, is get people around you, and get people around you who have failed and who are afraid to say that they have failed, or not afraid to say, because I think, I think as women, this was something I actually shared with April and Stan, who are also great fundraisers here in town, is I said, you don't want to say anything bad about your business, because, everybody's an investor. And so like, if you ever don't have a smile on your face, it gets published that you're going down. And I remember I pitched somebody down in the square area at a building, and I was so exhausted, and he was a very nice gentleman. He was in town, and he said, okay, so pitch me. And I looked at him, I said, do you have a checkbook on you right now? And he's like, no, I don't. And I said, then I'm not going to pitch you. Like, that's how, like, I need the money right now, and I don't have any time. And a receptionist heard that interaction. And, the next day I'm getting calls from a bunch of people saying, oh, I heard at church that, your business is going out and all this stuff. No. I'm like, how did that happen? But it puts that in your mind that you have to always look like everything's going well. And I would argue that there have been more companies that I have seen just kind of close overnight than companies that I actually see struggle and live on for the long time. So I would say, don't be afraid to say what's wrong. And if you're talking with friends who have just knocked it out of the park, you're not talking to the right friends. That's right. I mean, frankly, it's just more believable if some things are wrong with your company. Oh yeah. Because, I mean, I always say we're allowed 3 big blemishes. There are at least 3 things that are absolutely detestable, and we need to be ready to talk to those. But like, every company has 3 serious problems, at least. Yeah, you bet. Well, sticking with the theme of challenges women face real quick. As a woman, how do you balance being a mother, a wife, and an entrepreneur? Well, my husband, it's hard. There are so many amazing women that do it without a partner. So I want to say that it is doable. I will say my partner he knew, I mean, I built a business model, I failed 3 times before I met him. And so I think that was something really critical is, he's a professor, he has a steady job, it's tenure track. Very nice. We're not making bank, but like, we won't go hungry. And I think that stability has been really helpful. There's a different kind of pressure when you feel like you're going to not be able to feed your kids. So that's, and again, I count that huge privilege for me. Of my situation. So I would say I'm in a really good spot. I think the key is, for me, has always been to let my boys know that like, this is a family business, and that in this family we serve others before we serve ourselves. So, if we don't have Christmas, it's because we made December 30th payroll, and they're okay with that. Like, so when people come over, they know that we're in service to the people that work at Stopwatch, and we're in service to the investors, and they know that we're playing for the long haul. I always say we're playing for that, cottage on Santa Barbara Beach. Not that we really care, but like, I just let them know that this is the life that we've chosen, and they get to be part of it. Now, consequently, both my boys are incredible entrepreneurs. And I think have a really healthy relationship with money and possessions and kind of relationships. And I think that's really cool.
Well, it's not hard to tell where they learned that from. And,
Well,
you do have to, live like a crazy person so you can live crazy great later, right?
well, I always say, live like no one else so you can give like no one else is where I get really excited.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Well, let's pivot a little bit. Let's talk about Bentonville and Northwest Arkansas. Why is this the right place for your company?
It's a great question. So let's just start with the economics. Living in Seattle, building a technology-based startup in retail, you've got a couple problems. Number one, the cost of living. Number two, it's a venture-rich market. And so really good development talent tended to leave as the letters changed. So, the best talent would move to whoever closed, the biggest round, and they'd go and they'd build, and they wouldn't have to have a lot of accountability, and they'd go find another round and another round. And so for me, my brother is an incredible developer and has had serious success. But just kind of watching that, I realized that I don't want to say not smart enough, but just not, maybe I'm too OCD. Like I knew if we were going to build something, it needed to be the same guys for about 5 years, because we needed to kind of finish each other's sentences. And I knew in a Seattle or a Boston or, even a Denver market, the developer kind of culture is just a little bit different. That being said, so we could afford to live here. The developer talent, I think, is fantastic here between Missouri, S&T, Michigan, Austin. Like there is some really good Midwest, and for me, I really like .NET. It's like the Latin of programming, and it's very prevalent in things like Walmart, JB Hunt. I mean, the stuff that's very organized. It's not sexy and mobile app VR kind of stuff, but it's the stuff that like big monies gets made off of. And so I knew from a culture perspective, this was going to be a really good place to build a team. The last kind of two things, and again, I'm very economically driven. The state is awesome. They're a pain in the ass to work with.
They are everywhere.
Yeah. But I think over time, if I treated the state as if it was a venture capitalist, and so. I'm so, lucky. We've gotten tax credits for all of our investors at like 33%. I think we have the highest tax. So anybody that writes $1 to me gets, 33 cents back in credits. And then those credits, if they're not an Arkansas investor, they can sell them for 90 cents on the dollar.
Right.
I mean, it's just, to me, I'm just doing the math and I'm like, this is where we should be because it's more, like people make more money if they invest here. Yeah. And then the state actually, believe it or not, it has a venture fund that has paid for a lot of STOPWATCH. And, it's non-dilutive funding. They have a silent seat. So when you're looking to balance out your cap table, they're really good players to have on the cap table. They're very strict. So I always tell people, a really good company or a really well-run company if they have, state venture on it, because the requirements are incredibly stringent. It's taxpayer money and that sort of thing. But I think we've brought in at least $500,000 from the state in matching funds, and they'll do things like, hey, if you raise $300,000 by this date, we'll match it.
That's great.
Yeah,
I love it. Well, how do you feel about the vibrancy and sort of the growing success of our startup ecosystem here in Bentonville and Northwest Arkansas? And talk also about ways you've had the opportunity to contribute to help these entrepreneurs.
I don't think I'm out of the weeds yet. So I don't want to think I've made it. I think I really love seeing through Endeavor. I think there's some groups from Tulsa coming over. I really, really have enjoyed just getting to know founders and people who want to found. Typically, because I'm so into my own thing, I can't be viewed as an investor because, but I am the biggest cheerleader. I'm absolutely convinced that if anybody is going to go for something like this, that they feel really good about it. And I love to have lunch and talk with those people and just focus on the good, because 90% of the people are telling them everything that's not going to work. And I believe that there's a seed of major success in every single thing. And so that's been, I just feel like I've made more friends, and, you know, I'm not such a weirdo. Still a weirdo, but
we are all a little bit.
Yeah.
Some of us more than others. I'm going to point at myself. For the folks who are just listening to audio, I'm pointing at myself. You know, as with many builders, you're a generous giver of your time, and thank you for that. You know, whether you're in CPG or supply chain or otherwise, what should other founders be thinking? Why should they have a presence here in Bentonville?
Great question. I mean, again, I'll focus on the STEM talent, the cost of living, although it is going up, but it's still ridiculously reasonable. And then, you know, the opportunity as educated, and I think it's up to more founders to educate their peers, because if, you know, I love Startup Junkie, and I love all the like formal education parameters, but I think it's a lot better when I get a text from Michael Palladino that says, hey, a new tax law just passed and I'm in on it. You want to get in? I mean, like that type of energy is kind of like get up and go energy. And so I think, you know, making friends here, and, you know, I think one thing I really love about Northwest Arkansas is it doesn't feel to me like you have to work super fast and be super flashy. You know, I think a lot of venture capital raising, I remember early on when it wasn't my own company, but I was on, you know, a director's board of a different company. You know, we'd go into Neiman Marcus and put on jackets and, you know, take the tags off and then put them back on and put them, you know, and that whole game is just such a waste of time and energy when you've got so much good business to do. And so you know, thankfully, I don't think Northwest Arkansas is there yet. And I'm grateful for that.
You know, I met with a company earlier today that an investor brought over to see me and a couple of other folks. And, you know, everybody waltzes in their outdoor shirt and untucked. You know, it's just, that's the way things are. You don't have to throw on a suit every day. I mean, I put on a dress shirt and sometimes a jacket and so on. But the reality is you don't have to do that all the time here. And it just makes business easier to do, and it makes it more real, because you can be real human beings to each other.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I really like, you know, it's a double-edged sword, so I'm always a little bit critical, and I think we're changing that. But if you think about kind of, you know, not like the everyday wealth, the everyday high net worth individuals that live in this area,
right,
have amassed that wealth really from stock in one big company that they've had for a really long time. And that's a very different mindset. Like, those aren't the people that run to sign up for the angel funds or,
right,
you know, like take random bets at the country club. Like these are people who have earned their, you know, beautiful wealth through a very different business model. And so I'm always a little bit like, I warn people that there is a lot of money here, but if you're not a church and, you know, or you're not, you know, something very traditional, it's hard for people to get their heads around it. I think that's changing quite a bit. And it's not bad or good. I would argue that it's been great for me, because the number of times that I've sat down, actually, I just did it the other day with Atento Capital was in town, and, you know, a really great, smart person said, well, when are you going to be profitable? And I said, that's not the right question to ask. Like, we'll be profitable in 2024, but if I said next year, you shouldn't invest in me. And he, you know, his mind just blew. And I said, that's not the model. Our model is to raise a bunch of money, burn it, raise it again, burn it. Now, you know, the metrics and everything have to work, but, you know, it was interesting. But I think what it helps me do is really stay on top of my P&L. Because, you know, believe me, when it's time to be profitable, like, we are going to be the best damn profitable company on the planet. But it's just a different model.
Yeah, that's great. Well, hey, you know, let's talk more about Bentonville. You know, in your roughly, I guess, decade that you've been here, how has Bentonville changed, and what do you think the next decade's going to look like? I'll just throw you a crystal ball on that second half.
I don't know. I think I'm excited about the diversity. I really, and I say that with my heart. When we first moved here, you know, I miss my Black brothers and sisters. We came from inner city. You know, I missed color and culture. And I can honestly say that, you know, in the 9.5 years that we've been here, we can go to a park and see tons of color and tons of opposite dress and and so for me, that's really exciting. I think, you know, I don't think it's adversary. I think it's just that to me has been a blessing. So I believe that's going to continue. I believe that the education is going to continue to be strong. You know, with the resources that we have and a lot of the underwriting that the Waltons do, I mean, we have access to laptops and facilities and things, you know, that are pretty incredible. And so you know, my hope is that Arkansas, you know, becomes a much more like food stable.
Right.
There's a lot of food insecurity in Arkansas, not as much in Northwest Arkansas, but my expectation and what I tell people who are, you know, looking for me to invest is like, I want to see the metrics towards mental health development here. And I want to see the metrics towards food insecurity. Like you can't have those two big black eyes and, you know, not have a path to changing those. So that's my hope in 10 years. We'll have good mental health, you know, for all ages and stages and be much more respectable in terms of food insecurity in relationship to the rest of the country.
That's great. You know, make yourself a mental note, and I'll try to remember as well. There is a mental health tech company locally that could use some mentoring and guidance, and it's female led. So I think you might be somebody they should be talking with. Hey, for this next part, I'm going to ask you 3 really quick rapid fire favorite or sort of favorites questions for Bentonville. Let's start with favorite place to hang out and watch people.
My front yard.
That's a good answer.
I live in a vendor community.
Yes. Lovely.
Odd people. We're all odd.
Excellent. Favorite place other than at home to relax?
I would say definitely the square. The square is just lovely. It's quaint.
It is. And finally, favorite restaurants. And I put an S on the M because I haven't encountered anybody who can give me one.
Oh, Wrights. Wrights. I mean, we are meat and potato people. I'm sure there's more like fancy stuff out there, but I think half my paycheck goes to Wrights. We love Wrights.
Excellent.
And I got a bunch of boys, so, you know, it just kind of works.
Yeah, boys will never turn down barbecue.
Especially not when mom was paying for it.
That's right. Well, with that, tell me a story. And what I'm looking for is what I'll call a hashtag because Bentonville story. So something that's kind of unique to hear or describes the essence of this place.
Yes, you know, obviously, like I'm a weirdo, and I'm sure a lot of people love all the mountains and the bikes, and like that's all amazing. I'm more of I just love the economic development. So I always try to find grandparents at the park when my boys were little, and I would just ask them like, how long have you been here? You know, what's your role? And like 9 times out of 10, they had this amazing first story, right? Like, you know, I was the first person that brought silver jewelry to, you know, Walmart. You know, I printed, you know, the first whatever. I was with Mr. Sam, and I just, those are such fun stories because, you know, they were. So I look for people with gray hair, to be honest, and I love to just say like, hey, what are you doing here? What's your history? How long have you been here? Where did you work? And these stories just come out, and I feel like I could write a book on just how many cool, you know, random firsts that have come out of these, you know, these miles.
Oh my goodness! Well, in your spare time, it sounds like you're writing a book. That is so cool. I'm going to pick up that same pastime. What's something that you believe that nobody else believes?
My team's gonna. I don't even want to say it. I always wanted to be in espionage. So I have a lot of like, you won't find me on my phone in the airport. I'm pretty locked down, and people make fun of me, but I can see a lot that's going on, and I just don't believe that we're ever not being somewhat attacked by tech. So Yeah. And it doesn't bother me. It's just a very real thing to me. People are always like, oh man, I was, I told my friend about Rice Krispies, and then I got an ad for Rice Krispies, and I'm like, and you think that's an accident? Like there's some serious technology going on, and so I get a lot of crap for that.
I went to Bentonville Bike Fest, and I went home to Seattle, and I'm getting Bentonville Economic Development ads. I don't know how that happens.
Yeah, blows your mind,
It is crazy what technology can be done with technology now. I haven't asked anybody this question in a bit on this show, but it's my superpower question. If you had a superpower and that superpower came with a limitation, what would it be? And if you'd like, I'll give you an example.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mine has evolved over time. One of mine could be that perhaps I could wave my hand and change the outcome of any Arkansas Razorback game.
Okay.
The limitation is that I can't change the outcome of Arkansas-Texas games, and we would lose all games to Texas. That's a terrible one. I'm throwing that one out.
Ooh, it's a
need a new one.
Yeah. It's a utilitarian argument. Greatest good for the greatest number of people times like the emotional distraughtness.
Yeah.
Gosh, superpower. Man, James, that is a really cool question. I would say. So I struggle, with mental health, and I would say if I could help people, like if I could wave my hands and people could see themselves the way, not perfect, but the way that other people see them. I feel like there's so many teenage girls that I talk to that are like, oh, everybody's looking at me, and I felt that way all growing up. I mean, I was suicidal. I mean, there's just a lot of mental games, and I look back and I think, nobody was looking at me, but I wouldn't have believed that. And so it's almost like I don't want everybody to feel good about themselves all the time. I just want them to have like a head on their shoulders that's not completely screwed up in terms of how they're feeling. I feel like then they'd have a chance to, make, same mistakes and decisions, but they might not be as echoed as far. So that's kind of I think the limitation would have to be that if they were feeling that as they are feeling the way that they are, that they would have the courage to tell other people, that something's wrong. The emperor has no clothes. So the limitation would be, if you happen to fall out of that, mindset, that it would be totally okay to be like, girlfriend, that ain't true. Like literally you're listening to lies and you're telling them to yourself, and you're talking about my friend, and you're you and you're my friend, and I don't let my friend talk about my friend that way. I mean, just things like that I think are really, would be really cool. I think we can do it. Yeah.
I love it. That's cool. Okay. Last question. What's something I should have asked you that I did not ask?
Oh, I have a question for you. I don't know if that counts.
Oh, sure. Why not? Uh-oh.
I remember when I first met you, you had a caricature of a metal arm. Do you remember that?
It
was like a robot arm.
What do.
Was that? It was so cool.
My consulting company, which really doesn't do any consulting anymore, I just use it
You just punch people in the face with your steel arm.
Yeah, I just use that now to get people to talk to me about med tech these days. But that was the logo for my consulting company, Medical Device Guru. And I had integrated into that logo 3 things, and those 3 things were related to my prior 3 ventures. The colors came from the orange color in the logo came from the 0 to 510 Medical Device Accelerator, where I was the entrepreneur in residence for a couple of years. The
there was some blue.
Oh, the blue related to a shooting star of a company that, well, anyway.
We've all got one.
Yeah, we've all got one called Mobilizer. And the robotish arm you saw related to a company called Handminder that technology was out licensed. I don't know that anybody's ever going to make money on it, but
That's okay.
it was a device that was helping stroke survivors recover the function of their hands a lot faster and in a way that was sort of an active therapy instead of a passive therapy, which virtually
so
all
their
therapy
muscles
for that
are
is.
their muscles are moving with the tech.
Yeah. Well, it required some participation by the stroke survivor, and all the technologies and therapies that exist, or at least up to that point that existed, really were passive. They could do nothing and get the treatment, which didn't really rebuild the neural pathway so well, or not as fast. So that's what that was all about. Did not think I was going to be asked a question today and have think this through. No, great.
I just remember, I think when you were moving here, like somebody introduced me to you and I looked you up and I'm like,
what is that?
Like whatever he's doing, I want that, because that arm was awesome. It's like, yes, I think it was Graham. I'm like, yes, get him here. He's the guy.
Oh, that's great. Well, Meagan, this has been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for spending time with me and our audience today, and for really being so open with things, and for everything that you do for entrepreneurs lately, and just for being you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and we'll see you around.
Yeah,
Appreciate
sounds good. Well, hey, to our Bentonville Beacon audience, thank you once again for spending time with me and Meagan this time. Please keep coming back to hear more about Bentonville and its leaders and businesses in Northwest Arkansas, this place where you can have more of what you want and less of what you don't. And also a couple of favors, send a link to this show to a friend through social media or email or text or however you want to get it there. And visit BentonvilleEconomicDevelopment.com to see all the episodes. And then finally, if you're listening on a podcast player, go ahead and hit subscribe. Thanks. We'll see you next time.